I've been thinking about humility and insecurity and maybe arrogance too. It seems like there's slippery divisions in between those ideas, feelings, ways of being.
I don't know, Kendra. When I try to talk to my kids, they don't listen to me. They tell me that I think I know everything. And I keep telling them, I'm just a few years older than you. Maybe you should listen. They call me arrogant and they walk away. I think it's part of our nature to just say things and do things without really knowing what we're doing or what we're talking about. It's just organic, I think. And then sometimes you actually do know things, but you encounter those who are not perhaps ready to receive what you have to give them. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's cooking or cleaning or talking, whatever. And I think when you do know something, there is a certain force about you that comes across. I was telling Cassie and Stacy before your arrival, it's only been a few years where I look at my parents and I have an inkling of an idea as to how much they really sacrificed. Most of the days I just walk around quite arrogant, but once in a while there's an opening, I look at them, a 50-year-old man just walking away his country from his people, from his family, relatives. My mom, the same way, coming here. When you have a good job back home, people respect you. When you come here, you wash cars. You don't even speak the language. It's only been like 35, 40 years that I'm beginning to understand. And sometimes when I do reflect and I do understand, and that understanding comes with some feelings, In some ways it makes me feel bad for what we kids put them through in some ways I, appreciate what they've done the best I can. Going there and fixing a car wash, or washing the dishes, or listening to my dad's conversations about politics and religion, even though I'm not really interested in hearing what he has to say. I think humility just comes organically the moment you understand something. I mean, really, really understand it. And it doesn't mean that sometimes it doesn't come with a hint of sadness or regret or guilt or anger or shame. But I don't know how one can become arrogant in the right way and how one can become humble in the right way. Going back to what you were talking about regarding Irina and Bai Sahib, I can only talk about my own experience, and most of my life has been revolved around these ideas, really, since I was like 18 or 19. Something about me, I think, just became very quiet. And it wasn't me, it was Mehrdad and Hussein as well. That we went to Hussein's house. We just were quiet. I can't tell you why we like that man, Hussein. All I know is that he just inspires certain feelings, And it's not like we went there and we understood that what he was talking about, because we weren't at that stage. I think for the first 5-6 years, just are a bundle of feelings, and very much like, what you were talking about. It's filled with confusion and anger, because most of the people in your life are moving forward, They've gone to school, they've graduated, they have jobs, they're making money. And from the outside, their life looks really, really good. And here you're just, these ideas just coming down, hammering away at you, and you don't know what to do with them, you don't know what to do with your life. It's all a mess. And yet you couldn't walk away, And we would do everything for this man. That was the sort of humility that, at least for me, I could bring up once in a while. It wasn't all the time though, because once in a while you do kind of look around you and you're not going anywhere. At least it doesn't look like you're going anywhere, and so you become very angry. And once in a while you would walk into his house, in rage, because you don't know why these ideas or why he's doing. It's not that he was doing anything consciously. I think it was just happening to you. I think that was the best sort of humility that I've experienced in my life. That there was someone I liked, I respected, I loved. And I was willing to kind of sacrifice what I had. And I didn't have much ideas, not very many thoughts about anything. But a great amount of emotions are inspired by him and through him. And I don't think there's a how-to. I don't think you can teach people how to be humble. I think we all have some sort of a false narrative about who and what we are and our accomplishments. And that kind of false arrogance kind of backfires eventually in life. But sometimes you do become good at some things. I mean, I think, when she made her drink, you made your fruit salad, and the assumption behind all that is, I'm going to make this and I'm going to take it to his house or their house and they're going to eat it and they're going to say, wow, or the drink. I mean, there's a great amount of arrogance in that how dare you bring something to my house and then you ask me to drink it or eat it. Well, the truth is, it's good. It tastes good. You know what you're doing. You know how to cook. And there's nothing wrong with that. And just in case it's not compatible with someone's taste buds, well, so be it. But for the most part, you know exactly what you're doing. There are some people who just don't know anything, but they're filled with arrogance. And one of the things that usually happens, I think, you have these intimations, these feelings. You don't know how they come about. But there is a certain pride or arrogance, if you want to call it that. Salam Baba. When you go to gatherings and when people are talking politics or religion, people are in their 60s or 70s, and here you are, a tiny little kid, and you kind of open your mouth. And I remember so many occasions because Hussein had told me to memorize the 4 Gospels, and I had done so. And I go to gatherings and people are talking about this stuff, and all of a sudden I, like verbatim. And once in a while you catch yourself, you hear yourself, and it feels good. But the truth is you don't really understand what you're talking about. You're just like a volcano of feelings and emotions, and you're inspired. I mean, you really do become a zealot in I suppose, a nasty way. And I think one of the... Merci. I think really part of it has to do with nobody has anything to offer you. A lot of people have a lot of bumper stickers, and you can kind of see through that. And the fact that they open their mouth and they talk about this stuff, it angers you. You're not yet at a stage where you say, people are where they are, and this is who they are, and just leave them alone. If someone wants to say, Hitler is great, well, that's just the way they are. You can't do much about that. I think if you do have something that you're worked at and you're quite proficient, and if you run into someone who's in the receiving mode, I don't think the person in poverty or the person in need is going to look at you and say how arrogant, especially if the two of you have some sort of a relationship. If on the other hand someone has not asked you for anything and you keep wanting to interject and give them things that they don't really want, then that's pretty arrogant of you. Maybe outside of Hussein I was arrogant. Once I go inside his house, that goes away because Cassie made that drawing. That's Khaja Abdullah Ansari. He has this he did 13 volumes of commentary on the Quran, and he wrote a couple other books about the stages that people go through. And he has a prayer book. It's 25 pages. And if you happen to be in the right place, in your journey, they kind of just go inside you and they stay inside you for a long, long time, especially during Ramadan, the fasting month. He says, sometimes I look at myself and I see a complete mess. And I say, death is the only thing I'm worthy of. And sometimes I look at myself and I'm filled with pride. There is something majestic, something divine, something profoundly inspiring that lives inside me. And I think we're stuck between, these two worlds. There are moments you find yourself in certain physical environments that inspire, sometimes raw arrogance, sometimes proficient arrogance, sometimes humility. They just happen, But I think in general, if you have found something, it doesn't matter what it is, you can detect people who are interested and people who are not interested. And so you're not going to sell your craft cheaply to anyone. It's kind of like you have understood a few things about your body. You've understood a few things about what it means to be a woman. You've understood a few things about love. You've understood a few things about sex. That in this physical activity, there is your history, your emotions, the way you think about yourself, about life. And you've had enough experience to know that when you have this particular activity, you inject your entire being into this. It's not like it's only the body and the mind and the emotions are elsewhere. And so you do go out on dates, you kind of fill out this list of qualities about yourself, that's your profile, and somebody calls you and you go out on a date. But you've understood a few things about yourself and you're not willing, not just physically becoming intimate, you're not willing to intellectually become intimate or emotionally become intimate unless, the both of you share the common denominator in some shape or form. Or maybe you don't share anything, it's just something, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau would say about the natural man or the natural human being, is that you just run into someone. You don't know why, you don't know how, but there is this like unmistakable chemistry, and eventually these two things need to come together, even though perhaps on the surface there is nothing in common, but organically there's a hell of a lot in common. You just don't understand it. So sometimes you catch yourself making a lot of mistakes in life, or having made a lot of mistakes. And that's devastating. So I guess the short answer to a very difficult question, you fall in love and everything about you disappears. It's like this love makes you an Abraham and your history becomes like Ishmael or Isaac, and you're more than willing to sacrifice everything because this person asked you to. I just think it's good to be broken by the right people. I I can't say it was fun to be broken by Hussein when I was much younger, because I didn't think my life would amount to much, and it still hasn't really. So you really want to understand pain. You can't fathom how your future is going to be. All you know is that you're just devastated. You know, you don't want to be around this man, and yet you want to be around him like 24/7. He inspires you, he devastates you. You know, and then time passes, and hopefully all the things you suffered, sacrificed, kind of pays off in some shape or form. It's something I always tell Cassie, you know, that her desire to learn Persian, her desire to be at the gatherings for almost 30 years, it's not so much about me, it's really about Hussein. But it took me a long time to understand that. It's just good to be a vehicle for someone who knows to some extent what they're doing. And I can't say for sure that Hussein knew what he was doing. I think he was just میخوای بیا بدا؟ بیا بابا یه 10 دقیقه بشین بعد برو. And it doesn't matter how arrogant you are, Kendra. It doesn't really matter. As long as you understand the immensity of your craft, you're always going to exercise humility when it comes to cooking, because there is so much to learn. But when you try to teach other people cooking, they may assume that you're profoundly arrogant. So what? Let them assume that. You know? But I think if you're true to what you're doing, to your craft, if you want to be really, really good, and if you love what you do, it doesn't mean that people won't shame you, and it doesn't mean that they're not going to impose guilt upon you, and they're not going to make you feel bad, and you're going to feel all of those things. But your recovery time is relatively quick, and then you find yourself before whatever it is that you want to do, and you just kind of sit, and you pay attention, you study, you take notes, and you go at it again. That's the ultimate act of humility, I think. You know. But unfortunately, at least for me, I don't think these things can be learned. In other words, no one can teach them to you. You know. The best I can do is, I say, Kendra, you know, one of these days, you're going to buy yourself a tiny little house, and then you're going to have your tiny little friends, and then you're going to invite them, and you're going to say, you guys come for dinner. And then they do. And then you realize for a week you have to clean and you have to cook. You know. And then you have to serve them food and then wash dishes. And then they won't even say thank you. Okay? And there's a part of you that's angry about that. There's a part of you that says, I understand. And then you do this over and over and over again. And then when you're like 60, you're sitting, you know, drinking your coffee outside somewhere, and you say, you know, I remember, what was his name? I think his name was Amir or something. I used to go to his house. And after like 30, 40 years, you kind of understand a little bit about what took place some 30 years prior. And that's how it usually is. You know, I think the book of Job is really good in that sense. You go through so much in life, and then near the end, just before you're about to die, you know, then you begin to understand a few things. But you just have to become good at something. Yani baba. Yani.
You said that Hossein was your teacher for like 10 to 12 years and then became a family friend. How did that go?
You mean, how did it change? I know you guys have heard this 1,000 times, but I'm going to talk about it again. It's a way for me to remember Hussein and the other two good friends. I had a friend, Mehrdad. He was going out with this girl, and she got pregnant. Her father was a sheriff. And he goes to Mehrdad's house and says, if you don't marry my daughter, I will shoot you. So he got married. And then he had 1, and then 2, and then 3 kids. I think they're still married. The other Hussein, he was married too. I had nothing. I had just a confusion of a 18, 19-year-old kid. he was a big man. You know, he loved food. He had a huge belly. And he would scream at anyone if he believed that they were wrong. He belonged to a Sufi organization back home. But his teacher moved to America, and after some years, he decided with his wife to come to America, only to realize that the teacher's son had lied to him, that his teacher had passed for a few years, but they had told him that he's still alive and he should come, sell everything that he had back home and come here with some money. And he did eventually come to America, and his son became the guide of the organization. Hussein is a number 8. You know, he likes to dominate, he likes to be in power, and in every conversation. And one of the nice things about such people is that it's something we talk about all the time, you know, when I go to Roseville, is that if Hussein was at a gathering, all the conversations would revolve around religion and politics. Nobody could just sit back and gossip or talk about, you know, at least what he considered to be useless. He would also guide our music sessions. He had a big voice and he was a big man, and, you know, and he would always say, well, this is boring, change it, you know. You know, there is a stage in your life where you need your parents to take care of you. You need them to buy you food, you need them to buy you clothes, you need them to take care of you. There comes a point where you just get to be like 16 or 17. But parents get domesticated by life and their responsibilities. I mean, they just worry about your education, they worry about your job, they worry about your future. They don't much care about your, I suppose, your soul. But at a certain point, I think every teenager is looking for their soul or something that brings some sort of a meaning to their life, because they look at the adult world, it sucks. And I mean, everything about them hormonally is changing, and they don't really know what's happening to them. All they know is that they kind of feel betrayed by this whole thing called existence, you know. And so at that stage, I think you need someone to walk into your life, because society is not going to give you much. It's just going to give you junk. So I was at a certain point where I just needed some guidance, you know. And it's a matter of luck whether you run into a charlatan or you run into someone who is devoted to his craft, not the craft of deception, but that he himself was a seeker of sorts, you know. And I guess when you find someone, and when I did at least, that I felt that he has certain things about him that I want and I need, and I don't even know what they are. All I know is that when I go to his house and when I'm around him, I want more of whatever it is that's happening. You know, I like the emotions. I like the fact that I begin to think. I like the confusion. I like the pain. Everything is just so like sweet, you know. From the outside, someone may look at you and say, well, why do you look so sad? Well, why do you listen to this guy who always kind of makes you think and, you know, makes you feel like an idiot? And you say, well, you know, you're right. I don't know why, but I like it, you know. Now, it may be that Hussein didn't have any of those qualities, like wisdom. He was just a guy who just read some books, and he was just had a very domineering, you know, presence. But if you like someone, if you love someone, none of those things really matter. So at a certain point, like 6 months into having met him, I just began to like him. I mean, really, really, really like him. That if I wanted to do anything with my life, the first person I would call was Hussein. You know, he came to the car wash once. I said, you know, I like that girl. You know, and she was the sister of my best friend. And he looks at me and says, no. I say, okay, it's finished. You know. You know, I may have romanticized my relationship with Hussein, but Hussein would not romanticize his relationship with me or Mehrdad or the other Hussein. And that's one of the things that is kind of a little weird between, you know, students and teachers. And there is nothing wrong with any of that, but and I say romanticize in the sense that sometimes when I would talk back, he would say, Amir, you know, if you don't want to come here, you don't have to. There is no need for you here, ever. You say, you know, I've been around you for the past like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. I have no life. There's no future. And you tell me to get lost. What sort of a human being are you know? Every aspect of my life and Mehrdad's life and Hussein's life revolved around Hussein. Everything. There was no space inside any of us that Hussein had not occupied. You know, all the books that we had read is because of what Hussein had taught us. We would always, if, you know, during especially Ramadan, the fasting one, this is when we used to fast at least. The 30 days of fasting, he would be present at least for 20 of them. You know, and there is something really special about like breaking bread or just being around the person that whose company you enjoy so much. Abida Zakani is a poet, and he has this really wonderful story that about a cat and a mouse. That if you look at a cat who's waiting to devour a mouse, the cat just stands still, just like frozen, and the mouse assumes that the cat is not alive; it's just a statue. And so after, you know, I suppose some contemplation, the mouse begins to walk, and the cat just devours him. During those years, every time that we would go to gathering, it would be like this cat frozen, just waiting and waiting and waiting for Hussein to open his mouth and talk. Initially, he would ask for questions. Then there came a point that we asked questions. We also wrote our questions beforehand, and we would go there with notes and just write things down that he would be saying. Then there came a point where nobody had any questions and nobody wrote anything. It was just nice being there, you know. And then what added fuel to our passion is whenever anyone had dreams, Hussein was right in the center of those dreams. You know, when you're with someone for about, you know, a decade, you have like hundreds of dreams, and this man is at the very center of it. And then at a certain point, something happened. And I don't know if it was because I started going to school because of him, and I started doing philosophy because of him. But at a certain point, you begin to think, you begin to have your own thoughts, and you begin to reflect. And you would also kind of expand your horizon a little bit. You would kind of begin to experiment with Gurdjieff. And little by little you come to realize there is a bigger world out there. Hussein was a really good genesis. He was like the spark and this wildfire. But now you want to kind of spread your wings and you go to other places and discover other things and experiment. And little by little, at least for me, you become a bit more autonomous. And when you become autonomous, you don't really have that much need for Hussein anymore. One of the nice things, and I always say this to especially my ridiculous male students, Hussein was a simple guy who just had like a mini mart. He wasn't in the classroom. And it were just the three of us or four of us, for like many years. And so you wouldn't say, I want to have a deli just like him. I want to have a mini mart. Or I want to talk to my customers about cheese and bread and books, And so there was no temptation. The only temptation we had was, I want his wisdom, He wasn't getting attention from his customers because he was such a brute and such a force, and no one liked the way he kind of approached ideas in such a forceful way. And I think in that sense we were very, very lucky. It kept us very simple, very humble, that we didn't covet the sort of attention that sometimes instructors get in the classroom. We didn't covet sometimes the power that instructors get by being in the classroom and having students look at them, And luckily, I think we were just broken in the right way. Sometimes you fall in love with someone and they walk away. And it's just a man, he's immature, it just takes him a long time, like a decade, maybe 5 decades for him to figure things out. But sometimes you find yourself in a really, really, really good and healthy relationship, and the guy just has a stroke and dies. Now, you don't want to be single for the rest of your life, you want to have a companion, but you can't find anyone who's like him. And so you remain single for the rest of your life. It doesn't mean that sometimes you don't have needs, and it doesn't mean that sometimes you don't satisfy those needs. And it doesn't even mean that you won't get married. But it does mean that you will never have the sort of emotional connection or relationship that you once had, and that's never going to disappear. So I think Hussein had at least broken me in all the wrong ways that my parents didn't like, nobody liked. Because it's such a devastating place to be for so many years. And one of the problems with when someone is married and they become a widow, their companion dies, and they just go into this dark hole and they don't come out for 10, 15, 20 years, or maybe 5 years. And then their friend says, well, don't you go out and date? And you say, I don't even know what that looks like anymore, It's just you and your teacher for all these years. You don't respect anybody else except your teacher, No tea tastes the tea that was served at your teacher's house, you know. Everything just had a very special flavor. And there came a point when Hussein said something, and I just said, "Can I say something?" "Yeah, Amir, go ahead." And then I began to talk. And the other Hussein liked it. And Hussein said, "Very good, very good." And then he shook his head. At a certain point, you know when this relationship, at least the way it used to be for so many years, it's no longer the same. Something about the relationship has changed. So you just kind of, you know, do your own thing for a while. But because we're also talking about the 1980s, the Persian community is very small, especially in Sacramento. So, you know, 20, 30 of us would see each other all the time, family-wise. And even though I no longer saw Hussein as someone I could go to talk about these things, because I didn't respect his ideas about these things anymore, you know. I could now think of the way Gurdjieff would approach things, or the Gospels would approach things, or Krishnamurti would approach things. You know, and then a few years later, I just began to like challenge him in gatherings, like family gatherings. And I remember my brother on a couple of occasions coming to me saying, "Watch it," you know. And so we still played music. I never went to his house to see him, except when he had cancer. But he would always come to my sister's house, my parents' house, and we would have gatherings in his house once in a while. And then he died. And I think in his absence, I came to understand a few things, you know. I'm not quite sure what exactly I understood, but that you know, everything you see in this house, if there is anything about me that you like, it's because of that man and the sort of foundation that he poured and he protected. And you know, all the people in this room and other places who now they teach and that's their livelihood and that's their profession, it's all because of him. Him and I, you know, are just from different generations, from different cultures. He had Persian students who were familiar with the Persian language and the Persian culture. So we had a lot of commonalities. You know, we would fast together, pray together, play music together. And I engage with people that have different temperaments and different backgrounds and speak a different language and have different life experiences and maybe want even different things in life. But the last, I would say, 10 years of his life, he had mellowed out. You know, he would never shout or scream when there were conversations. He allowed other people to kind of talk. My brother was not confused, so he found most of Hussein's ideas like uninteresting. My sister wasn't confused. They had both graduated with a master's degree, and I was still in high school, you know. And I don't really know how it works. You know, sometimes someone's chemistry can dazzle you. You just kind of gravitate towards them and you do what you do, and then, you know, the spark kind of goes away and the both of you part ways. Sometimes it's not just mere chemistry, there is something else, and I don't know what it is, you know. But I do know that something about you needs to be open. You know, it could either be that life has broken you and there is this like this crack that lives inside your psyche, and it's always been there for the past like 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. And you've tried many ways to kind of fix this crack, but it just remains a crack, and it sometimes gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's not like other people don't have good things to say to help you out. They do. But it just doesn't stick. But then you find someone, and you don't really know how it happens, but it seems like whatever it is that they say and however it is that they are, it kind of just becomes very compatible with this brokenness that lives inside you, whether life has broken you in some shape or form, or maybe just psychologically, you know, the moment you were born, something about it was just broken from the very beginning, you know. I don't know if I've said anything. Every time I see Stacy, you know, if you go back, because we used to have a mutual friend, Allison, with her mother, Carolyn. And Cassie and her were really good friends, and Cassie and Carolyn. Apparently I had met her in Davis like 30 years ago, you know. And Allison told me that, yeah, when Stacy first met you or saw you, she said, "He's such a creep." I'm just kidding. I'm sure you said that. And, time passed. And, I'm not exactly sure where we met again. I think at Helen's house. Was it at Helen's house? Yeah. And she still believed me to be a creep, But we had some gatherings there in the woods. And then things changed. I don't know how, I don't know why. He certainly was a force in our Persian community. No one gathers now. And conversations are no good, really. We don't even have them. You just need someone to remind you of certain things. And without them, you just kind of just forget. I'd be very embarrassed to talk about this stuff in this way for many, many, many years. It's only been maybe the past maybe 3, 4, 5 years, maybe less. Where, it makes me feel good to talk about this stuff because I understand more. I kind of appreciate more all the things that he and his wife did. And I suppose in some ways because I couldn't really thank him while he was alive, this is my way of thanking him. It's probably somewhere in like purgatory or hell. There were no women in our gatherings, maybe on just a couple of occasions. And maybe the 10 years, maybe twice. I wouldn't know how that would have worked, given that the Persian culture, it's so conservative. And there are definite do's and don'ts.
Have you ever had like groups of just only men?
No. Men have to be in a receiving mode for at least 10 years. In other words, they have to become feminine and stay feminine. They have to become submissive. I'm not talking about physically, that there are certain feminine qualities that a man needs to acquire to stay with a teacher for a long, long time, to be broken in the right way. I think most of the male students that I've had, they're all nice people. They're very nice. There is something so tempting about power. Maybe just the way us men have been wired, I don't know. Men can be good for a couple of years. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing. No, but in general, men aren't very good. On Telegram, I get all these audios. Men talking about, all these ideas. They just smell so bad. And I don't know why. If you were to ask me why, I couldn't tell you. Just I hear their voice and I hear the way they talk about these ideas, and just once in a while you do get lucky. And someone just happens to be just in the right mood and just talking about something that fits them. Just because you have a good voice and you sing, it doesn't mean that you can sing all the songs out there or songs that are made for you. Sometimes the song just doesn't fit your soul, it just doesn't fit your temperament, it just doesn't fit your voice. And so even though you have a great voice and you sounded amazing in like the previous 5, but the 6th one, you're just awful. I remember many, many years ago, I don't know if you know who Krishnamurti is, but it's just some guy from India. I was walking with him and in his funny little language, he's a tiny man, says, "So, what's wrong with you? Do you have any questions?" I say, yeah, I have just one question, but you can't answer my question. He kind of looks at me and says, yeah, okay. And, I just put my head on his lap and I cried a little, and that was it. I think if I ran into Eckhart Toilet or any other teacher out there, they would kind of try to detox me, You live in your mind too much, or I don't know, something. Don't live in the future. Don't live in the past. Live in the present, all that nonsense. But to your question, sometimes it even makes me feel a little weird. They walk into a room and, it's all women. Thank God my aunt doesn't knock on the door to say, so I want to see what's going on. And then she would probably immediately call my mom. And my mom would drive me in the morning, grab me by the throat, slap me a few times. Yeah. Can you just fully close the door, please? Thank you.
Does it make you feel loved?
Loved? What does?
Having all these students or having all the attention.
Do I like the attention? No.
No, I'm thinking more like, does it feel? I don't know. Do you feel like does something feel fulfilled, or do you feel like it makes you feel cared about? I guess.
Maybe you should say your question again, because I don't want to just. You know, you could just say your question as bluntly as you want. It's okay.
Yeah, just do you feel loved? Like, do you feel like
There is this mythical story. It's about a father who loved his daughter. His wife had passed, and she was the only child that he had. And she was 15, and someone knocks on, the door and says to him, "I love your daughter. And, I have like a castle and 5 horses and 2 dogs. I'm rich. Let me marry her." And the father says, "No, she's too young." Then, a few years later, another person knocks on the door and says, "I have 5 castles and 50 dogs and cows, and let me marry her." "No, she's still too young." And this goes on and on and on. He's like 90 and his daughter is now 70. And there's a knock on the door. This like limping 80-year-old says, "I have like 25 castles. Can I marry her?" And he says, "No, she's still too young." I think people can like me, and I think people can love me. But I also think people can love their own lives. They can love their own companions. They can love their own pursuits. Some people can love your body, and there is nothing wrong with that. And the moment you share that with another, they will probably be very upset. I think some people can kind of love a part of you that maybe is not as physical. And they also have the understanding that your physical body and your physical life demands attention from elsewhere, demands nourishment from elsewhere. But there's also this other part of you that this elsewhere can't answer and this elsewhere can't nourish. And so I don't know if Hussein knew that we loved him or not. I'm sure he knew, he just didn't say anything. There was a point for all three of us where we just left him. Someone like me, I was young. I hadn't lived life, and I wanted to go out there and just get a job. I want to, I don't know, have a girlfriend, go to places, And maybe, he felt betrayed. Maybe he felt sad. Maybe he felt abandoned that after all his years of, working with a couple of people, that they walk away, don't even call him, don't even say thank you. And when we gather, we don't even listen to him, we walk away. I think if the element of love and respect and intimacy, if these particular components were not present, no one would have gone to school for humanities and philosophy. And no one would teach in the classroom. And no one at the same time would have their own unique physical life that is filled with stuff and it's rich. So, unlike the father who doesn't like to share his daughter because, he loves her so much, or maybe she loves him too much, I think you need initially to possess this love. And you need to protect it. And you need to make sure it doesn't get distracted until it just goes inside you and just stays inside you. And even though, despite all the pain and the chaos it creates, the many times you would want to run away, there is something about this particular emotion that forces you to go back to the place where this particular emotion was created. Once it has solidified inside you, the job is done. Hussein doesn't need to be alive. I take him to the classroom every single day, and he has been part of my life for the past 30, 40 years, And it's just not me. I was in Roseville yesterday fixing the car wash, and my mom fasts, so while we were breaking fast, 45 minutes of our conversation had to do with just the powerful presence of Hussein, you know. And how much that everybody misses him now that he's gone because of the sort of elements, you know, the subtle things that he would bring to the table. There is this couple of lines by Rumi. دیگران چون بروند از نظر از دل بروند تو چنان در دل من در دل من ماندی که از بیخبری دل و جانم به تو مشغول و نظر در چپ و راست تا حریفان ندانند که تو منظور منی. Yeah, so you know, I don't know. I left the house yesterday at 3:30 in the morning, and I was at the car wash at about 4. And then I came back. By the time I got here, it was like 9:30, 10 o'clock. And Yusuf wanted me to like see his gymnastics while he runs and destroys the house. I don't know if you can call it love, but I couldn't reject him. I couldn't reject the innocence and the joy and the excitement that he had. Does he know that it's love? I don't know. Does he know that it's... I don't know what it is. It's something that you will encounter in Daughter of Fire. You know, Cassie was 17. She's now an old woman. Ali was like 18. She's like an old woman. You know. Alexis was going to UC Davis studying like some medical field. You know. If there was no care or passion or love or intimacy, it wouldn't exist. There are these lines in Rumi where, you know, I'm just going to put it in the context of like a romantic relationship where one person loves another. That this young man loves this young woman, and he keeps looking at her. And every time she looks at him, he kind of just goes like this. He doesn't want to be caught. And so دل و جانم به تو مشغول و نظر در چپ و راست. That my heart and my soul are intoxicated by you and your presence, but my eyes are always going back and forth to all these other places, so that when others look at me, they will continue to assume that I love the doors and the windows and the books, and not the woman. I can't tell you the number of times at gatherings my father would catch me looking at Hussein. Your eyes would become glossy and you just look at him, and then you realize your father is looking at you and the way you're looking at Hussein. And you catch yourself as a son, you catch yourself all of a sudden and you say, man, I hope my father didn't see that. And so just to make sure that, your father is not hurt, you kind of just get up and you say, Dad, can I get you some tea? Create this illusion that you were just, staring into the space, not really so much Hussein. I'm sorry, Cassie, did you want to? Stacy?
Let's see. Could you please talk about either if there's a thin line between pain and pleasure, or how to stay in pain?
sometimes you have people in your life that you don't really like, or you don't enjoy their company as much. But maybe they're just your family, and you have no choice but to just hang out with them. And they are the cause of so much pain and anguish and distress. And there isn't much you can do. Unless once in a while, like, you look at your mom or dad and they're old. Even though they have wronged you your entire life, your dad is 90 now or 100. He can't walk, he can't talk, he can't eat. And even though you don't want to do all the things that you're doing for him, because you say to yourself, well, they were never there when I was weak and helpless. Why should I be there for them now that they are weak and helpless? But your temperament and just who you are, forces you to do things that you don't really want to do. And so every time you go to them, there's a good amount of pain, and there's resentment and anger. I had gone to Hussein's shop one day. I told him that I'll come pick you up from your shop, and I just need to see you and just be around you and talk. I had gone to Safeway and bought one of those ridiculous chocolate cakes that would kill you. And so he says, Amir, okay, let me just fix the pantry a little bit. I'll be right out. So he went to the back of the store, and I was just whistling. I was whistling some like traditional music very quietly, but he heard me whistle. And he comes out and he looks at me and he slaps me really, really hard. And he says, where do you think you are? You come here and whistle? Don't you know how this stuff works? Not only was the slap painful, his words was, they were also painful. And so I just sat there. 10 minutes later, he was in my car. We drove to his house. And I assumed that I'm just going to go in. We're going to talk. He says, go home. I don't want to be around you. Jeez. Well, here's the cake I bought for you. Trash it. It's no good. So I go to the other Hussein's house. And it was such a painful couple of days, because your entire world has, just turned upside down. And you were just innocently whistling a song, lyrics by Hafiz, the Sufi poet. But Hussein didn't care about any of those things. But it wasn't the slap that was painful, and it wasn't his words that were painful. That I behaved without really knowing in a way that disappointed him. That was painful. And I never whistled for the next 30 years, whenever he was around, And I guess the point is, first of all, who creates the pain? Life is not our friend, and life always creates trouble, always. And the idea of making peace with life, I think if you're young, you have to fight, and you have to create for yourself a physical life, where you create for yourself a gated community. You invite only the people you want to invite. You talk to the people only you want to talk. You go to the classroom and you talk about the things you want to talk about. There are specific meetings you go to, and most of them you just dismiss completely. There are only certain questions you will entertain, And so little by little you realize the sort of pain that you enjoy is the pain that's like caused by your own reflection, by the books you read, by the conversations you have with your friends. You don't want life to come in, you know. You don't want to hear gossip. There are not very many pains out there that will inspire creativity. You know, unless we just happen to be very creative and every time life offers you a bad hand, you just go sit behind the piano and you just pour out your soul, you know, on the key. And that becomes your release, and then you just go back to life. You know, I think the best thing anyone can do for themselves is make sure your physical life gives you a sufficient amount of power where you can choose the kinds of pain that you want to be visited by, you know. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'll say it. Yusuf has been having a stomach ache for the past, like, I don't know, almost a month. He misses school once in a while. He goes to the nurse's office sometimes. And in our community right now, there are a few people who have been diagnosed with cancer. And so I'm being the kind of a gloomy sort of a chap that I am. I said, what if, you know, he has like this incurable like disease? What are you going to do, Amir? Because most of your time and your life from that point on will be eaten up, taken by taking care of, you know, Yusuf, and your life is going to be turned upside down. Sarah's going to be sad. Sophia will be sad. You know, you have no time to do much of anything. But it's something I haven't experienced. But there is this longing inside me that I want to see how I will be. You know, if I have the resources, if I have the willingness, and if I'm at a certain place in my life right now where I can just retire from things, from talking, from reading, from writing, and just go to Kaiser like 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week. And it's not like some stranger who's sick, it's your son, or it's your daughter, or it's your parent, you know. And so, and it doesn't mean that you're gonna look forward to going to Kaiser or hearing your son scream. It's not that, it's just, you love your son, you know, to whatever degree. And you want to make sure he's as comfortable as possible. So, and this idea of Stoicism, for example, or any idea that's out there, you know, pain is your friend. Pain is not our friend. You know, I'm not Khalil Gibran. I'm not Jesus Christ. I'm just a regular guy with some ridiculous ideas in my head that some once in a while I share. There are moments where I can sit by the piano and express the pain that lives inside me. You know, that I have a nice home, but I feel homeless. You know, I'm married, children, I feel alone. And that's something all of us feel. But it's something that I have for the past like 40 years of my life been expressing in music and writing in the classroom in a variety of different shapes and forms. There are some pains that you can't express in the right way. You don't even know how to express them. You know, what you simply have is grief, and the outcome of this grief is you just sit somewhere and you cry, and you want this pain to be over. And I don't know when the volcano is going to stop erupting, you know. So, since your body is going to fail you, since other people are going to fail you, since your life out there is going to fail you, just make sure that you have enough power to pick and choose the sort of pain you want and the people who are going to impose that pain. You know, there is no reason for you to carry another's pain, especially if you don't care for them, you don't like them, you don't love them. There is no reason for that. You know, there are 8 billion on this planet. Everybody's suffering. And you have a certain capacity. Understand that capacity and be okay with that. You know, you're not a messiah. You know, there is only so much you can do. You know, when Sarah was pregnant with Yusuf, you know, she says, I think my water is going to break soon. So we go there and I'm exhausted. It's like 3 in the morning. Go there, sit by the window and just fall asleep. And the nurse comes in and says, is that your husband? Yeah. He sleep? Yeah. And he sleep now while you're about to like give labor? Yeah. You know. Did I feel guilty for like being exhausted? No. Did I feel guilty for being asleep? No. I mean, luckily I woke up in time to see Yusuf coming out, but would I have felt guilty if Yusuf had already been out for like weeks? No. You know, I was tired. I slept. Does it make me callous? I mean, other people can have, you know, their own perception of things. If you were to be a student in my class right now, and if the class had exposed you to a world of ideas, and if you were at a certain place in your life where you took those ideas home, and if those ideas like generated all these intense emotions, and little by little the pieces in your life were to fall, you know, in the trash, because the ideas would render them meaningless and without much value. And then one day you would come to my office and you would just break down, saying that you don't like anything about your life. Well, your pain is something that was created by my hands. You know, if you were not exposed to these ideas, you probably still have your husband or your wife or your job or your sanity, but you don't. And so, because it's something that's connected to me, I will carry the pain. If you get fired from your job, I'll give you a room to stay for a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, you know. You have to see your own reflection in the pain that's out there, in whoever, you know. If you can't see your own reflection, well, you can't really create a relationship. You know, even like when you want to help a homeless person, you kind of study them. Are they black? Are they white? Are they old? Are they young? Is the man? Is the woman? You look at the facial expression. How sad are they? How hungry do they look? And then you make a political decision. I'd rather carry his pain than hers. I'm not going to go out of my way and like help every person that's out there, or both of them. I only have money for one. I know there may be all these books out there who will tell you, you know, how to best deal with pain. And some of them are probably really, really good. I just think like anything else in life, you know, you need to pick and choose your companions very, very carefully and closely. And make sure you have resources, and make sure you're not just inspired by feelings or even intuitions that are very difficult to kind of tell which is a feeling and which you intuited. a year into my relationship with Hussein, I was reading all these like classical Sufi texts that I had my grandfather sent to me from Iran. I mean, these are like from a different time, 8th century, where these men would do crazy things to keep themselves awake and aware and mindful. They would do all sorts of ridiculous exercises and rituals, and you're young, you know. But when you fall in love, what you really want to do is, to some extent, you want to make yourself in the image of that thing, okay? And so when you read like, it's freezing temperature, there's snow out there, and this guy says, if I was to close my eyes and fall asleep, I'd probably miss my prayer in the morning. And because I don't want to miss my prayer, I'm just going to just go and sleep on the snow. Because as long as, you know, it's freezing temperature and the snow is uncomfortable, and I'm going to be like waking up every like 2 seconds. And so you read this stuff and you say, oh, so this is what these people did. You know what? I'm going to do the same thing. And so you realize that you actually walk towards certain kinds of pain because the assumption is that these are the sort of activities that will help you get somewhere, you know. And, you know, in many ways it really depends who's in your life, how you've been trained, how you've been conditioned. Again, I go back to Hussein. One of the nice things about Hussein is that he called us at the right time. You know, 3 confused, silly little kids. We were open to be brainwashed. And he brainwashed us. With his ideas, with his presence, you know, with his home, with his generosity, with all the books that he gave us. Some painful times, but they were good. Yeah, don't extend yourself too much. It's not good.
Where you talk about sometimes you talk about when you met Hussein, that you had, at that point, a fairly stable physical life. And sometimes you also talk about how it's important to have certain solid foundation to be a good student, or to be a student. What if your foundation is very cracked? Do you...
It just takes longer, and it just takes more patience, and it just takes more sacrifice on both parties. If I was to create a scenario, for example, and forgive me, I'm going to make it cheesy, so my apologies. So, when you were 5 or you were 6, your parents divorced. And they were really never good from the beginning, you know. You would scream in your room and no one really would tend to you. And so after a while you just realize that the only person who's able to take care of you is you. So even though, you know, you couldn't walk, you couldn't stand, and when your dad or your mom ran to help you, you would say no. At the age of like 2 months old. Saying, no, I can do this on my own, just buzz off. And you have this assumption about you that for the rest of your life you're able to do all sorts of things on your own. You've done it for the past like 20 years and you've survived. And you're going to carry yourself relatively well for the remainder of like 60, 70 years. At a certain point, something about you just hungers for something. You may not know what it is. And you may not even hunger for anything. But that hunger is inspired by someone or something. You know, it's kind of like, you don't really want to have a Pepsi right now. But if the logo comes on the screen, all of a sudden you say, Amir, do you have Pepsi? Okay. You may not have a desire, but someone from the outside could manipulate you into having a desire. If someone just wants to have his or her body grind against yours, they're not really looking for emotional relationship or intellectual or spiritual or intimacy of sorts. They just want a good, quick time. Well, your life is going to remain relatively as it was. That you're never going to allow anyone close because you know what that means. People will have power over you once you depend on them, and they can hurt you. And to avoid the pain and to avoid hurt, you'll just remain solitary. You'll get close only so far, and then you will retreat the moment you realize you're going a bit too far. Okay, I'm not sure if you'll be successful at all times, but you'll do the best you can to manage the emotions well. Now, let's say that you fall into this trap of love. Let's just say you love someone, and it's something you've avoided your entire life. But this time you realize you're at a certain place where avoiding it is nearly impossible. I mean, it just consumes all of you. You know, you're just restless and you hate yourself because you had promised yourself for the past 20 years, never get so close to anyone. Always leave the back door unlocked so you can run away, you know. And so you realize the way you've done business with this person is that there is no back door anymore. You're just stuck. You know, it's kind of like Jean saw his play, No Exit. They're just locked in a room and there is no exit, you know. Now, because your past is checkered and because I love you, what's going to happen is I want to give you everything that lives inside me, but you have a tendency of always just pushing back and rejecting my gifts. Now, that means you're going to abuse me. Now, you don't really want to abuse me. What you really want to do is you want to open yourself up completely, fully, and wholly. But something about you says, no. As Stacy would say, this guy is a creep. You know, you don't want to get too close. If I love you, I will take your abuse, because that's what love really is. If you don't love someone, if Irina doesn't love Bhai Sahib, she's not going to take the abuse. She's not going to give him her money. I mean, she's not going to give him all the money that she has. She's not going to give him her beliefs, her ideas, her thoughts, her emotions. She's not going to do any of that. But what you realize is that she loves this man so much that she rather live in complete poverty, physically, emotionally, intellectually, you know, than to keep what she has. Now, what you have in Irina Tweedy's book is you have a woman who abuses this man for about 10 years until she understands, until she has certainty, until she loves wholly and doubts no more, you know. So, if, for example, your foundation is cracked, instead of 7 years, it's just going to be like 12 years. That's if you stick at it and I stick at it. If you continue working on this relationship, you know. If you're talking about a very simple, basic, romantic relationship, it's not going to survive. At a certain point, you know, this crack will just open up and it will just swallow the history, and all the awful things that have always lived inside the sewer system will just kind of come up. Okay. If you're talking about the relationship between like Irina and Bai Sahib, one of the things that love does, it really, as long as that emotion stays, your past has no power to intervene. The only way that your past will come in and say, don't go there, you know, don't go see her, don't go see him, is when the intensity of your love, because of perhaps some time has passed, or maybe you haven't seen this person for a few days or so, and so your mind is distracted with other things, and you say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't go. You know, but as long as that emotion is intense, there's a good chance that your past and all the things you want to project will kind of just be devoured by this emotion called love. And if you're able to keep that going, you know, eventually what will happen is, because it is above, it has a tendency of showering down, or maybe just getting rid of slowly, gently, all the things that eventually the crack is going to be put back together, you know. And it doesn't mean it's going to completely disappear. What it will do is that once this love has burned you and matured you, okay, let's say I will die, but now you know what to do whenever this crack opens up and shows its face. You know, you have the tools, you have the right emotions, and even if once in a while you fall, you're able to get yourself back up. You know, you can't fix life, and you can't win over life. But what you can do with some training, and by some I mean like 10, 12 years or so, you can manage life a bit better. You know, I'm not going to win over cancer, okay? But I know I'm not going to get angry. I know I'm not going to like project my anger onto Sarah and the kids, okay? That's all that you can do, you know. It just takes longer. If I don't give up, if you don't give up, if I don't get tired of your abuse, you know, the thing is this, you're going to be very disappointed every time you abuse me and then catch yourself abusing me, and you may want to retreat. You say, you know what, I'm never going to go there again. I'm just not worthy of his time, or maybe I just don't know how to do this stuff the right way. If I love you in the right way, perhaps, what I will do, even though you want to run away, I will drag you. As Rumi would say, sometimes you need your teacher to grab your hair and pull you by your hair even though you want to run away. You know. There is nothing that... There's always a way to fix things. It just takes longer, that's all. You know, Ouspensky wrote this book. He was Gurdjieff's teacher. The Strange Life of Ivan Osokin. And I think it's one of those chapters near the end of the book where this young kid, Osokin, runs into a magician. And after many, many pages, you get to the kind of the last couple of pages. This is where Osokin comes to realize he's made a lot of mistakes, and the magician has the power to send him back to life when he was like 2 years old. And then he'll have enough time to fix everything. And the magician tells him no. Even if you were to go back and put yourself in situations, you don't have the tools to fix them. And you will know how incompetent you are, that it'd be far too painful for you to go back, you know. It's like going back to your ex, even though you know he's no good for you. You have so much information about your ex and about your relationship that the knowledge is painful, and you go back to the relationship with the knowledge. You know, it's not a blank slate. But the interesting part about the book is the magician looks at him and says, listen, just give me 5 years of your life. I mean, you're going to waste it. You're going to drink it or smoke it or, do all sorts of crazy things with it. Just give me 5 years. That's all I want. Just 5 years of your life. Give it to me without question. Just like Jesus, thy will be done. Let me do what I need to do. Don't object to anything. And that's a huge sacrifice, on the part of this young kid. And the magician says, go, you have only a couple days. Come back and let me know what you want to do. Imagine if Irina wasn't able to give herself to this man for like 5 years. You wouldn't have this book. And I think if you're able, and nobody is able to, I think it's a ridiculous thing for this magician to ask, but I think if anybody is able to, despite all the doubts, all the fears, all the complexities, give their life to someone who's very, very proficient for a few years, their life will be really fixed in so many wonderful ways. Not all of it, but the major parts will be fixed. You just have to be patient, which is not the best of, things that we have. We have no patience for those things. You guys are tired. Are you tired? Cassie?
Are you tired?
No.
Sure.
Yeah. I think at this stage, it's just going to be like, forgive me, short and quick.
Well, I was reflecting on something you said about, I think it was maybe a question that Kendra had asked in class this week.
about weakness. And you said that one of the things that Gurdjieff was really good in was sort of being really relentless in showing his students the areas in which they were profoundly weak. So I wondered if you would talk about how a teacher like Gurdjieff goes about doing that, and maybe the effects that has on a student.
When I was very young, I had gone home from school and my mom asked me a question and I responded. She caught my lie. So she put some salt and pepper in my mouth and she dragged me in the street. We lived not too far from one of the most vicious prisons in Iran. And she dragged me in the streets while all my friends and neighbors were watching. She said, I'm just going to send you to Evin. You're no good of a son. And you know, you're like screaming and crying, saying, no, I will never do that again. My mom would never do that to a stranger. You know, even if she had seen some strange kids stealing something, or saying like bad things, it's a stranger. So before you can test anyone at the level that Gurdjieff did, you have already established a good amount of not so much trust, but your students, I think Gurdjieff's students knew that he knows things that they don't, and he can do things that they don't, and they have seen him do things that are basically like miraculous and amazing. And because also Gurdjieff, and just the way he was, from what little the books really say, this is a man who had like specific goals in life, and there are lots of stories about like him being angry, screaming, and within like a second, you know, he just calms down, as if he catches himself, he corrects himself, he knows when to use anger, he knows when to use gentleness. And so you can't really just put him in the category of us or me, a normal human being, you know, who goes crazy every 10 minutes. This guy does things with intentions. If I don't know you, if I've never met you, if I don't know your temperament, if I don't know your capacity, and if I know that if I was to test you and you have the power to kind of make a mess of my life, well, I'm never going to do that. So before you can test anybody, there has to be an element. There has to be a relationship. And there has to be some faith, some trust, even love to some extent. Because remember, a teacher-student relationship is always going to be abusive. Always. Student abuses the teacher because they don't know and they don't listen and they doubt. The teacher abuses a student because he or she is always taking a student on a path that just looks and feels dubious. Everything about it is just a little strange and weird. It just makes no sense. It also is because, you know, most of us have in our heads that teachers are supposed to behave a certain way. They're like immensely moral and immensely ethical. And they're like spiritual. And God would never do that. And the teacher would never do this. And the truth is, it's not the case. You know, Because inside the student not only lives assumptions, but also like thousands of years of culture that lives inside you. Not only your own personal experiences, but the culture lives inside you. And, you know, ultimately, I think all teachers, what they want is, you know, it's like any good mirror. You know, you stand before a mirror because you want to see your own reflection. You know, a teacher wants to kind of know that you have understood why 2 + 2 = 4. You know. I suppose you could do it in a very gentle way. It'll just take a few lifetimes. You know. So, all those things that we talked about in the class aside, before you can test anyone, before you can impose, you know, hardship on anyone, there needs to be some sort of a relationship. You have never met Jean. Oh, we talked about her. Jean used to come to the car wash and sit there for hours, at least 2-3 times a week. And one day she comes in and she's just in a very down mood. And I was young and I was stupid and silly, so I began to pour salt on the wound, you know. I began to talk about Gurdjieff and Krishnamurti and some of the Sufi, you know, practices and all that. And her mood got worse and worse and worse. And then the poor girl began to cry. And I remember all of a sudden Hussein driving into the car wash. He parked his car. He looked at Jean and said, "Jean, what's going on?" And Jean says, "You know, I've been here for a few hours and Amir keeps talking about this stuff and it just, you know, I came in a relatively bad mood, but now my mood is just like awful." And Hussein looks at me and he asks me, "Did you create this mood for Jean, or did Jean come here with this mood?" And I said, "Well, she came here with this mood." He says, "Well, if you didn't create it, you had no right to play with it." You know? Sometimes you create specific physical environments and you're looking for a certain outcome. You know? Sometimes that physical environment isn't there. The emotions that need to be there aren't there. So look, sometimes I scream at Yusuf. And sometimes I smack him on the head. And then we go out and play soccer for 20 minutes. If you want to create pain as a form of a discipline, you really need to take care of the person you have hurt. You can't just abandon them. It's not the right thing to do.